Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab, all on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dan Rundy, and I hold the Schreier Chair at CSIS. I also lead our work at the Americas Program. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation with Minister of the Interior of Colombia, Daniel Palacios, about the recent protests in Colombia and their implications. Colombia is a great country with a strong democracy and strong institutions. Colombia operates under the rule of law. It is one of the great success stories of the last 30 years. It's a member of the OECD, the club of democracy, market democracies, and is one of America's key allies in the Western Hemisphere. That's why the recent protests have caused concern in Washington, in the region, and all over the world. Everyone in Washington wishes Colombia well, and everyone would like to see the end to violence and then accountability. On April 28th, President Duque proposed a tax reform bill to mitigate the devastating economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some Colombians took to the streets in protest, believing the provisions in the bill were unrealistic because they thought that these taxes disproportionately fell on working and middle classes in Colombia. President Duque then withdrew the bill on May the 3rd. The protests have since continued and have become a broad call for improvements to Colombia's pensions, health, and education systems, as well as a response to law enforcement tactics. Some of these protests have turned very violent, with Colombian law enforcement responding in some instances with allegations with excesses of force and real excesses of force. As of yesterday, Tuesday, May 12th, more than 40 people have died in the protests in Colombia. It's a very serious situation. Today, our conversation with Minister Palacios will help us better understand the connection between the protests and the COVID-19 pandemic, government austerity measures, social media, and social protests. We're also going to get, a handle on our outside actors, whether it be Venezuela or Cuba or Russia, taking advantage and taking advantage of this and leveraging social misinformation or disinformation. I suspect there is some of that, but the issues are real. Finally, law enforcement responses, and in some instances, misconduct, and the Colombian government's response. We will ask the minister to reflect on the regional trends of protests and government economic austerity measures in the COVID-19 pandemic context. I want to highlight that we're going to do our best to dedicate a meaningful part of today to Q&A, to hear from the audience, to give you all an opportunity to engage the minister. You can ask questions by clicking Ask Live Questions button on the event page. We're so grateful to have Minister Daniel Palacios, the Colombian Minister of the Interior, join us for this discussion. He's served in many positions. He's a city council member, advisor to the commander of the military forces, presidential advisor to former President Alvaro Uribe, and now he's Minister of the Interior. I'm really pleased he's with us. But before we get there, I'm going to ask my friend, Ambassador Francisco Santos, Colombia's ambassador to the U.S., to provide some opening remarks. Ambassador Santos, the floor is yours.
Dan, thank you very much. And let me talk very, very quickly about the three crises, or the three elements of this crisis that we need to separate one from another. One is the peaceful protests. More than 290 towns marched without one problem. There's a social crisis. There's an economic crisis. We lost 10 years of economic growth. And certainly, there are grievances that are being attended by the president now in a dialogue with them. In the short term, there will be some grievances that can be resolved, but this is a long-term issue of how do we resolve all the effects of the pandemic, and how do we look at the young people, and how do we provide more opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. That's one crisis. The second crisis is a crisis of violence, sporadic, very concentrated, that has blockaded roads, that has caused innumerable deaths, that has had people shooting at the police responding. There's more than 50 investigations regarding that, but it's organized violence. It's a violence that has to do with something different than the protest, that has to do with creating an unstable Colombia that has all kinds of illegality involved in it, so that you can have a weaker state, a weaker Colombia, and a weaker democracy, which is what they want. And a third is the crisis of communication, which I think is very important, which I have to be very sincere. We lost the narrative battle. This is part of how we want to contract with information. There's brutal disinformation regarding this all over the world, and it has percolated in the media. But Colombia, the second oldest democracy in the region, strong institutions, like I said, I know will come out of this. So I'll give the floor to Minister Palacios so that he can start his presentation and hopefully answer most of your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. Minister Palacios, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning to all. It's a pleasure for me to be able to have this important space to address the issues and questions that many of you may have about the situation here in Colombia. Let me first say, send my regards to Ambassador Santos, to Vice President of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Daniel Rund. And I was listening to the introduction made and what Ambassador Santos just said. So I would start by one of the parts that I listened when you were beginning your introduction, was that Colombia is a democratic state, that Colombia has solid institutions. And let me that be the first part of this entire presentation. Colombia is a country under the rule of law. We have a long-standing democratic tradition that has been upheld by all the Colombian governments. We have not been a country with a history of dictatorships. We had one in our history, but this has been a country in the region that has been always recognized for being a solid democracy and having solid institutions. So that would be the first part. I heard also that this started on 28th of April with what was called a national strike. And this national strike with protests was in somehow related to the tax reform. And that is partly true. There was a tax reform that the government intended to introduce as a result of the effects of the pandemic. We had no intention of doing any piece of legislation that had a new tax reform. But what the government of Colombia, led by President Duque, was confronting was the excess of expenditure that the country had to do in order to confront COVID-19. We had to almost duplicate the amount of internal care units in matter of months. We also had to invest in what we have called ingreso solidario. This is a monetary transference as a welfare check that we gave to 3,600,000 people in Colombia in order for those who were the people that were more affected by the COVID pandemic, which lost their job, were getting poorer by the minute. And this was a way for us to limit the effect of the pandemic. And at the same time, we had a lot of different social programs who were directed to the most vulnerable people in Colombia, including a subsidy for formal employment for small businesses and also large businesses. And at the same time, we had to make extraordinary payments for the other social programs as Familias en Acción, which is also a program that is directed as a welfare check for the most vulnerable families in Colombia, Jóvenes en Acción, which is a program directed for the youth, the more vulnerable youth, and at the same time, all the programs directed to children that were also enforced during this period of time. This made that we had to have an impact in our economy, in our deficit, in our debt, and in order to pay and to continue having all these programs, including gratuity in education for the most vulnerable people, we had to make some adjustments, and this helped to for this national strike to have a more reception in more of the in the society. But just to be clear, the strike was already in place 4 months before we had the tax reform, and is the continuation of what happened in the 21 of November when we had also a national strike. And the first part that I want to be very clear, Colombia, and the president has made it clear, I have made it clear, the Minister of Defense has made it clear, the entire government is absolutely clear that we not only respect, but we protect peaceful protest. And the manifestation of the people as a democratic expression is protected under law, and is the responsibility of our armed forces and our national police to guarantee that exercise. But we have to separate peaceful protest, peaceful manifestations from riots, violent riots, and a lot of delinquent activities that we have had in the country. And this is very important for you to have and understand, because in the US, you have lived a peaceful protest and the difference when there's a violent riot that has different activities that put in danger the rest of the society. So let's just say that in the entire country, there have been more than 5,000 activities with peaceful protests, and over 700 municipalities in Colombia have participated in those peaceful protests, and there has been no riots, no disturbance, no interventions by the police, no use of our anti-riot police, which is El SMAT, which has no lethal weapons or weapons of reduced lethality. And that's the first part. And that shows that in Colombia, people can demonstrate, people can protest without having any interference by our police. On the other hand, we have had around 67 to 17 municipalities where there have been hard riots, systematic vandalism, violence, where there has been robberies, and this has, without doubt, had to have the reaction under the rule of law, under the procedures, under international protocols, and always protecting human rights of our national police. So let's have another statistic, which is very important. From the 28th of April to today, we have had more than 1,200 peaceful protests, and only we have had in the entire country, with more than 5,000 activities, we have had around 700 interventions of our anti-riot police, which have been directed to stop a riot or to stop a violent expression. But as a result of that, I had another statistic is we have had today by our Attorney General's office, and I want to make this very important. Colombia is a country of institutions, but it's not, our system is not as the US system. Our Attorney General is a completely independent institution from the national government and the executive branch. Our Attorney General is elected by the Supreme Court of Justice. And the Attorney General of Colombia is the only institution that can certify if someone has been assassinated, someone has been killed, what were the reasons, where was the place, and who is the responsible or the presumption of responsibility, and then a judge has to declare that responsibility. So under that statement, we also have the People's Defender's Office. This People's Defender's Office is also independent, is elected by Congress, and is the one who is responsible to oversee human rights. And on the other time, we have the Inspector General's Office, which is also elected by Congress, but under a nomination made by two of the four national courts, and one by the president. So this is a completely independent system which has the responsibility, one, to make prosecution of possible misconduct, behavior, and homicides. And on the other, we have two who are the responsible to make the vigilance of human rights. All of these institutions have been operating without interruption and have been giving the Colombian people the results. As a result, today we have 32, not 40, 32 people who have died during this period of time. Of those 32, 11 have been related to the riots, to the protests, and there are 11 that have some kind of relation with law enforcement, and those are being under investigation. 3 police officers have been indicted of those possible homicides, as possible responsible for those homicides, and already 7 of those homicides have been ruled out that have no relations with the protests or with the riots or with intervention of police forces, and the rest are being conducted under investigation. What that demonstrates is that this is a country of institutions and that the judicial process is underway. The judicial process is not the process of social media or social networks, and it's not what some organizations of human rights defenders may say or may have as possible responsibilities. This is a country of serious institutions, and only those institutions are the ones who can establish responsibilities. But let me be clear, the Colombian government, all our government has been absolutely clear that there's zero tolerance for excessive use of force, for police brutality, and all activities conducted by our police forces have to be done under the procedures and protocols that have been established that comprehend the human rights and also at the same time are under our constitution. Whatever goes beyond that point, whatever exceeds those functions is not only rejected, but it's investigated by internal affairs of the police in collaboration also with these 3 different institutions that I have mentioned. And our spirit is always of collaboration for those investigations to be expedient and to give quickly results. So that is one thing that I want to make clear. On the other hand, there has been disturbance. We have road blockades that are putting in danger a lot of cities in the country. And let me be very clear. We have had around 1,300 blockades in the country, which limit medical services, food supply, medical supply, oxygen in one moment where the country is under the pandemic, which needs desperately oxygen to go into cities. They have also limited all exportations, all traffic of manufacture and different products. And this only does not affect cities, but affect the work, the liberty of mobility, and the freedom of work. And all of those cannot be understood as peaceful manifestations. Those are expressions of violence that affect the rights of the other people. And as a country that lives under the rule of law, it is the responsibility and the obligation of our police forces and our military forces to make the rule of law be enforced. And understanding that those manifestations sometimes turn to violence and turn to this kind of blockades, we also use consultation, we use negotiation, but we also have to use the proper amount of force to restore order and to restore freedom and liberty to all the country. And as a result of that, and I just want to give you this numbers. So we have had 32 people that have died, including a police captain who died in the municipality of Soacha as a result of stabbing by some of these delinquents who try to say that they're peaceful protesters. Then we have had 700 civilians injured. We have had more than 900 police officers injured. We have had, 849 police officers injured. We have had 305 commercial establishments vandalized or robbed. We have had 421 financial offices vandalized. We have had 1,000 public transportation vehicles vandalized, 156 stations, public transportation stations vandalized, 13 civilian motorcycles, 87 gas stations vandalized, 407 ATMs vandalized, 335 civilian vehicles vandalized, 2 religious institutions vandalized, 1 hotel which was burned to the ground. And let me just say that this hotel had members of the police in Cali sleeping, and it was ignited with them inside. And at the same time, we have had 79 governmental infrastructure has been affected and vandalized, 29 tolls in the country that have been vandalized, 14 cultural or monuments which had been vandalized, 1 bridge, 88 security cameras, and 33 headlights. Traffic lights have been vandalized, and 167 police assets have been vandalized, including 81 medium stations, 10 big stations, 30 police bikes, 39 police vehicles. And this has been the result of what have been riots. We have seized more than 11,000 weapons, these knives, mostly knives, 378 firearms, and 72 Molotov weapons and explosives. And these have had the result of 647 captures, apprehensions by the police, which are right now under indictment. Just to conclude, we have had some manifestations and protests that are protected under the Constitution, that we not only defend, but we protect. We understand that there are motives. Some have political motives, others have social motives, and all of those take the Colombian government to understand and to take the action or start a national dialogue with the different sectors and with all the sectors in Colombia that want to be heard. And that in consultation with all the governors of Colombia and the mayors of Colombia, we're conducting this dialogue not only at the national level, but at the regional and the municipality level, in order for all the people who want to be heard to be heard. At the same time, there's a very specific part of our youth, especially in cities, which are felt that they have been left behind. And in order for us to advance with them, we have also established a national dialogue at all the levels with youth, only with youth, which are now having some difficulties. They have been affected by the pandemic more than others, and there are some social resentments that have to be addressed, and we are in the disposition to do that. But on the other hand, we have had systematic violence, systematic vandalism, organized and financed by criminal enterprises, which have also been part of those violent activities. Our message has been, we do not accept violence from wherever it comes. We reject violence from wherever it comes. There's not such thing as a good death and a bad death. There's not such a thing as a good injured and a bad injured. And there's no such thing as good violence and bad violence. There's only violence, there's only injuries, and there's only deaths. And we profoundly reject all of them. And we are empathetic to those losses. And we sincerely and profoundly feel them in our hearts. But at the same time, we have to uphold the rule of law, and it's our constitutional obligation, not only to guarantee the rights of those who protest, but also the rights of those who are not protesting, who want to work, who want to have their freedom, who want to have the right of mobility, who want to receive medical attention, who want to have the ability to receive their products and have their food supplies and oxygen and all the different things that come from having normal mobility. The losses in the country for the restrictions to mobility, those blockades, those illegal blockades that have been placed in some of our cities have already given losses to our economy for more than $350 million. And every day that passes, our country is having shortages of fuel, shortages of food, shortages of medical supplies. And this is the part that as a country we cannot accept. And although we're trying to talk with those people who have those blockades in order for them to lift those blockades, we have the obligation under our constitution and in the defense of the rest of the Colombian population to use our police forces and our military forces in order to, under human rights and with all the precautions, to lift those blockades that are putting in risk the rest of the Colombian people. So this is like the reality of what's happening in our country. And although we will continue those dialogues, we cannot allow any violence. We cannot allow any vandalism, which is systematic vandalism. We cannot allow criminal behavior, and we cannot allow those illegal blockades that are putting in danger the rest and all the Colombian people.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. I've got several questions for you, and then I want to move to some of the very interesting questions from the audience. So you've established that it's, I 100% agree. Colombia is a country of institutions, rule of law reigns, is a very strong democracy. You've made it clear that if there have been police excesses and several have been identified, they're being prosecuted. You've also made it clear that peaceful protest is protected under your constitution and is respected, but violent protest, and you've listed in great detail the arms, the Molotov cocktails, the murder of a police, the attacks on property, and the cutting off of roads, all non-peaceful protests are not respected under law. I also think that it's important to understand that, that COVID-19, I think, has also created all sorts of distortions all over the world. I think people have been locked in. I think that creates some kind of weird dynamics. I also think, I don't know what kind of an economic hit your country has taken because of COVID-19, but I'm sure it's driving some of the economic, the issues you're talking about, having to invest more in healthcare to cover the emergencies and sort of the social safety nets, the new social safety nets because of COVID-19. All that requires money, and money doesn't grow on trees, if you will, right, Minister? So I've got a couple of questions for you, and then I'll open it up to other questions. But okay, so in your mind, what is driving the protests, Minister? Why are people protesting peacefully? Why are people protesting peacefully, Minister?
Well, okay. So why are people protesting? So I would try to separate those protests from what has been in Colombia the traditional protest, which is the workers' unions, which is what it's called the Comité Nacional del Paro, which is the national strike, let's say, symbol, which they have been protesting ever since the government started. And they have some, let's say, traditional and historic reclamations to the country, and they have some criticisms to some of our politics. Let's say, for instance, one that has been one of their, let's say, flags, which is they are against fumigation, aerial fumigation. You know, against
the anti-drug fumigation.
Exactly. So they are against that. They were against the tax reform. They are against health reform. They are against a lot of things. They are asking for a welfare check for all unemployed Colombians, and let's say for around 8 million people, for over $500, which would be around 80 billion pesos in Colombia. That's talking about like $30 billion, which we don't have, which is around, I don't know, like around roughly, if our entire budget is around 300 billion, and they're asking 80 billion just in this program, well, you can imagine the strain that this would have in our financial capacity.
Minister, how much of the protest has been, there have been some reports of some social leaders being assassinated, whether labor leaders or others, or sort of their safety issues. How much of that how much of that is true, and how much of that is driving protests?
Yeah, so let's say that there are some parts that are against policy, and there are some that are because, well, what they say is that there is no effective protection to social leaders in Colombia, and that there has not been an effective implementation of the peace accords. That, let's say, that's also there in the rhetoric, and that's something that we can discuss. We as the Colombian government do not agree. The statistics are very clear about the efforts that we're making, not only to implement the peace accords, which are extremely, and I'm pretty sure that Ambassador Santos can give you the information on the advancement in the implementation of the peace accords and in the advancements in the protections of social leaders. But I would not go to the discussion if they are right or they're wrong, because as I have said, that's a constitutional protected right. And even if we do not agree with what they are protesting, that's protected, and that's not part of let's say our discussion, because they can protest, let's say it plainly and clear, they can protest for whatever they want, for whatever reason, and it's not our responsibility to say, or we cannot question if they're right or they're wrong. Let's say that's something that has to be debated in Congress, in our institutions, in the next election, because this is a legitimate government that was elected by the people. And well, you know that in democracies, when people do not like their government, they can, in the next election, vote as they wish. And that's part of the democratic process. But at the same time, there is a political movement, and there are political movements and political leaders which are and have said from the beginning of this government that this government would be under permanent protest and permanent manifestation by those people who are followers of those ideologies and of those political movements. So that's also a reality. So I would just say, when you ask me of the reasons why people are protesting, I would say there's a bunch of reasons. There's a bunch of reasons at the national level. There are reasons at the local level, because what we have seen is at the same time, let's say that this social manifestation has come to the protest of everything and anything. So you're seeing protests in small municipalities to the mayor that go under the big umbrella. And we have seen protests that are directed to the governor, or protests that are directed to private sector, and all have come into one big moment of this big national protest in the country. And this is why the dialogue has to be at the national, at the local, and at the regional level.
Minister, let me get you there on this issue of dialogue. There's been some press coverage about attempts at dialogue. Could you speak about these? Let me describe them as attempts at dialogue. There's been some dialogue. Some of it's been maybe less successful than others. Could you speak to that?
So let's say that there's two kinds of I would say three kinds of dialogue right now. One dialogue is with the institution that represents the National Committee of the Strike, let's say it that way, which has some leaders, and those leaders have some petitions, and they are demanding at a national level meeting with the president and to negotiate those demands, because there are demands. They're not. It's not a conversation. It's demands to a democratic elected government. So what the government has said from the last week is that we were open to that dialogue, to hearing the National Strike Committee, and we told them that we were ready to meet whenever they wanted, and we have been all the time trying to bring them to the table. From last week, we were inviting them to go to meet with President Duque and the team. And they just met Monday. So they took 1 week to decide if they wanted to meet with the president. And during that week, blockades have still going on. People are losing their jobs. The economy is receiving the most important hit. And you have to amount COVID consequences too. So we are now having the heat that we received by COVID, and now by those blockades, which, as I said, are putting in danger people. Let me just tell you one little thing that happened last week. There was this young woman who was in labor, and she was in an ambulance, and in a blockade, they did not allow her to pass in an ambulance, and the baby died. So this is the unreasonable and the inhumanity of these blockades that we're looking. And what we're telling the international community is, you know what? Of course, we reprehend and we reject any abuse of force, but we would love people to start demanding, these people that are protesting, to demand these blockades to stop, because these are violations to civil liberties and to human rights.
So let me just say
that's the part that we cannot accept.
Absolutely. Blockading roads is this sort of thing is outrageous, and is taking on other people's human rights. So blockading roads is about denying people a chance to have a job. It's denying people to get health care. It's immoral. It's wrong, and it needs to stop. So I think on both, and then to the extent that police are using excessive force, that's wrong, and it needs to stop. And I'm very happy to hear that your government has identified 3 police that have taken, that were seen as using excess force, or being in the process of being investigated. And so I think there needs to be, this is very important. Let me go to something else. I get the sense, and I don't think it's getting a lot of coverage here, that there may be outside actors who don't wish the country of Colombia well. I'll list some countries. I'm thinking about Venezuela. I'm thinking about Cuba. I'm thinking about potentially Russia. Now, I don't know if any of that's, how much of that is a thing, to use the young people's idiomatic term. And so that's kind of one question. Then separately, could you talk about that may be generated by outside actors or not? Let's call it misinformation or disinformation on social media. That could be government driven or non-state actor driven. Talk about that, the role of bad country actors or bad non-state actors to put forward disinformation or misinformation, taking advantage, if you will, of this set of these protests.
Yeah, and this goes right to what we were talking about, those dialogues. And so there's this national dialogue, then we have to recognize that there's something going on with some part of our youth, especially the most vulnerable youth, which are feeling left behind, which are feeling that they don't have a voice, which they're feeling they have been neglected. And let's say that in that entire cocktail of people who are protesting under their right and with valid, in their heads, valid reasons, which we, as I have said, we do not question, we have also identified what has been the role not only of foreign countries, but also what has been the role of criminal organizations in Colombia, which also at the same time have a very big hit in the country with a strategic disinformation campaign, which also has been, let's say, potentialized by social media. So the first part, we have identified that this organized vandalism and this organized violence is also being financed by our criminal organizations, as the dissidents of FARC. Just this morning, we with a very important intelligence operations, we just apprehended one of the heads of Disidencias de las FARC, of the Columna Jaime Martinez, which were operating in Cali, and we just got that guy. 3 days ago, we got one of the ELN, who was also in Cali and is responsible of financing this violent actions. So definitely there's some actions that are being financed and promoted by organized crime, which has a relationship with drug trafficking, which at the same time has a relationship with the guerrilla structures that are in Venezuela, which are embedded in Venezuela. And in Venezuela, they can do whatever they want because they are not only being giving safe haven by the Colombian government, but are being supported by the Venezuelan government, but are also being financed by the Venezuelan government. We have had systematic attacks on our cyber infrastructure. The Minister of Interior was hacked. The presidency was tried to be hacked. The Colombian armed forces were tried to be hacked. The army was hacked. The Congress was hacked. And all of this, what we have seen is a lot of activity from Russia, China, and Venezuela, what we have identified. And at the same time, you have seen that Anonymous has given an interest in attacking and doing disinformation campaigns in Colombia. So this is a very organized. So there's a part that I would say that is organic and it's social, and there's let's say an outrage or valid reasons to protest, but at the same time there's an underlying organized, financed, strategically well played with social media and international support by organizations as Anonymous that have been generating content in social networks that without doubt exacerbate the people. What we have seen that they have done with some videos of supposed police brutality that later we can demonstrate that are not real or are from years before. We have seen even things that are not from Colombia, that there are things that have happened in Venezuela and that they start moving them as they were happening here. And let me just tell you, this has been crazy. I have been in the command center, in the National Command Center, when I have been receiving calls that, no, people are going inside a residential complex and they're going to kill us and they're going to kill us. And you start calling and sending police. And when police go there, there's nothing going on. There's no one. So it has been as strategic. And let me just say, Daniel, we're facing a new reality with this, and governments have to we have to understand that there's a different the gap with the communication process, because governments are slow. Governments tend to communicate, to prepare communication, and these people, they have everything. Let me just, and this is just for you to understand something. What has happened in Cali, let's say, and this is an example of the organization. They have this youth, these kids who are doing the blockade, right? So our anti-riot police starts, and they do not do anything because there's no violence going in the moment. This motorcycle with some people goes, they pay this, the ones that are doing the blockade, they start doing riots and they start doing violence. Then our anti-riot police starts to intervene, and the same bike that paid them starts to film, goes live on Facebook, goes live and on their media stream, and they start saying they're killing everyone. And at the same time, they have a WhatsApp network with all the people around the neighborhood, and they say they are killing everyone. And that this starts and this goes live and this goes viral. And we have these influencers of 7 million, 6 million people, followers, who start generating the trend, and then this goes viral. And then when you less know, the United Nations is involved. So this is amazing, the ability for the social network strategy that has been used to affect an entire country, and the vision that people are having of this country.
So, Minister, I've got to make sure I get several questions in. There's a lot of audience attention, and they've asked several questions. I'm going to give you a bunch of questions that you could spend the next 10 minutes sort of responding to, but I hope you'll get to 3 or 4 of these, okay? First is, so I'm just going to read them out, and then you can just take them. So so one is, what is the plan on applying and responding to finishing the job on the peace agreement of 2016? This was from the audience. I don't have a name. So just finishing the job on finishing through on the peace agreement of 2016, because I think that's one of the, I think, under the underlying issues. Could you please, there's another from a woman who has said here, recently the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Colombia reported that members of the High Commission were threatened and attacked while investigating the violation of human rights against protesters. What is the Colombian government doing to ensure human rights investigators can do their job? How, and you referenced to this, but I think they went a little bit more detail here. Another question is, how has the justice system in Colombia been working on addressing the responsibilities of the National Police, ESMAD, and National Army in the deaths, disappearance, and wounding caused to Colombian civilians during the protest? Will we see sentences or rulings for these crimes? And is the Ministry of Interior committed to speaking with the Colombian human rights platforms? Those are the 4 questions.
Okay.
I'll give you the next 10 minutes to respond to these 4 questions.
Okay, so first, the first question about the implementation of the peace accords. Let me just say that this government has had more advancement in the implementation of the peace accords than the previous government, which was the one that made the peace deal. Let's have something that's very important. When they signed the peace accords, these peace accords were made to be implemented in 3 governments. So this was made to be for at least 12 to 16 years of implementation. So what we have done is start that implementation, advancing the PEDETs, which are the municipalities that have been prioritized by investment. We have invested more than 5 billion pesos in those projects. Most of those projects have begun. The president of Colombia has visited more than any other president this concentration camps where members of FARC have been, and we have given them the productivity projects for them to develop. And let me just say, I think that
you mean concentration camps, but you mean that's what
the concentration, the ETCRs, which are these are in the implementation of the peace accords. There were some strategic locations where members of FARC would be
We're kind of protected or
concentrated.
set aside. They could convene.
Protected,
We're sort of like
exactly.
relative safe havens for them, right?
It's more like concentration sites as a safe haven for them to have.
Let's call them meeting sites.
Yeah, okay, let's call them meeting sites. The word in Spanish is it's easier because son ETCRs, que son espacios transitorios de concentración.
Me parece bien. Just go with that. Let's just go with that. Zonas transitorias.
And exactly. And so those places, they have been working. They have their projects going. They have protection by the army, the UNP, and all the implementation of the security measures for former members of FARC are in place. As they signed in the peace accords, we have had to invest more money because now there are more members of FARC which are in need of protection. But let me just say, and Ambassador Santos, I am pretty sure that he has all the information on the advancement of the peace accords. But let me just say that this was meant for more than 3 to 4 governments. We are advancing in the implementation that we have under our responsibility. And the Office of the Implementation of the Peace Process has been completely committed to making those efforts. And as a matter of fact, President Duque was the one that reaffirmed and asked the United Nations for the extension on the verifying mission to Colombia of the implementation of the peace accords. So we are advancing, and the statistics that we have of investment of money that has been introduced to the implementation of the peace accords speak for themselves. So there's a lot of political rhetoric under this.
Excellent. That's great. So, Minister, talk about the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
The UN High Commissioner, I have had a lot of interaction with the UN High Commissioner. At the same time, the defender of the Public Defender's Office has it too, the Inspector General, the Attorney General. All the institutions have a communication with Juliet Rivero, which I have had it too. I have not received any call from Juliet Rivero about any concerns on their security. They were in Cali. I met with a bunch of UN investigators in Cali, and I never received by them any a special request of protection, but they have the complete support of the Colombian government, and they have all the needs that they have in matters of security. They will have them without any doubt and without any hesitation, but I have not received any formal request of protection or increased security by them. I have not had that request. On Friday, a very large number of ambassadors to Colombia from the European Union and from the US are going to Cali under a mission with Congress and accompanied by our foreign relations ministry. And there's nothing to hide here. We're completely open to whatever scrutiny by any international organization. Just yesterday that we were in Cali with President Duque, members of MAPOEA of the OAS were in that meeting, and they heard the interventions not only of the president but of the police and the armed forces, but also of the civil society which made their interventions. So we are completely open to all and any scrutiny by anyone. And let me just say, when you were asking me about human rights platforms, that we have a very strong relationship with human rights platforms. We have our vice minister. I have one vice minister that has complete interaction with them, and a director of human rights in the Ministry of Interior who have a lot of contact with them, and we interact with them. And at the same time, these human rights platforms have a direct relation with the Public Defender's Office, which at the same time, he has those reports, and those reports are taken to the Attorney General Office in order for those to have the proper channel of institutional investigation. Because as you know, what a human rights platform says, it's what they hear, but it's not judicially being proven. So that has to have a institutional response, and that's the process that we have here in Colombia. In the matter of the justice system and what we are having, I wanted to give you this. So what we have right now is 25 investigations for abuse of authority of our police, 10 for physical aggression, 8 for homicide, 5 for personal injuries, 4 for failure to comply with orders, 2 for sexual harassment, 2 reckless handling of weapons, 2 negligence in the service, 1 loss of elements, 1 abandonment of the position, traffic accident 1, and leakage of a retained 1. So what this demonstrates are the investigations are underway. And this is a judicial process that is independent. And I would like to, first of all, know that judges are not under the executive branch. Convictions depend on judges and depend on prosecutors. But what we have now is that 3 are under indictment that have already been apprehended and are in disposition to the judicial system for them to undergo the judicial process. And we expect those convictions to be swift and to be quick. But let me just say that, for instance, there was a case a couple of months ago of police abuse where police officers they assassinated an individual, and they were captured and they have been convicted. So that would be an example of what happens. But I know, and it's the same case in the US, and I would go to the US process. Well, you have seen very emblematic cases in the US that they are under the judicial process, and they have to go to a jury, and they have to go to a judge, and the case has to be plead on a judge, and is the judge the one that will decide responsibility and if that conviction has to be made. So our judicial process is underway, and it's a judicial process that is independent of the executive branch.
Minister, this is great. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank the ambassador for his time. Thank you for giving us a much broader picture of what is happening. We really appreciate your time. And we know you're really busy, so thank you for making the time today. And we have lots of what we're wishing the whole country of Colombia well, and we're hoping to get returned to peace soon here, quickly.
No, thank you. And this is a very important opportunity because let me just say that what we have been seeing that has been the way the thinking of not Colombia. It's a democratic, solid institutions country that has had a struggle with violence, with organized violence, with narco trafficking. But this is a country that is open to scrutiny, that has nothing to hide, that we protect civil liberties, that we protect and guarantee peaceful protest. But as any country, we have a law, and we have to uphold our laws and the rule of law.
Great. Thank you, Minister. Thanks very much. And thanks everybody for watching today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.